Soldiers in Postmen's uniforms. This is the third game in a family of games that started with Pavlov House and continued with Castle Eater. Here we are still in World War II, and it's still, like the predecessors, a solitaire game that you can also play in cooperative mode with multiple players making decisions together. It still has a sort of State of Siege 2.0 feel to it, meaning like in the State of Siege games, it will be cards generating enemy actions and enemy movements, and then you'll spend your own actions to respond to those. Here's for the topic, we're defending the Polish post office in Danzig during the Second World War. Actually, it's the very first day of the war. How ominous that is. So we're going to control a number of people. They were just working in the post office, minding their own business, and all of a sudden there were waves of German soldiers storming the post office. It's a grim situation because, they're going to take it. That's how it happened historically. And yet at the same time, as the game tries to demonstrate, it is still an event that was important for the defenders, precisely because although it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to lose, they still fought. And so while the Germans saw it as a symbol of the futility of resistance to their might, the Polish and the Polish people saw it quite the contrary, as a sign of the importance of resisting even against impossible odds. There's a little bit of glare here, and from that I apologize. So this is the board of the game. It is divided into two main sections. The outside of the post office, and this is where we will place the counters of the Germans that will be coming from different directions in different phases of the game. They will arrive in waves with an emphasis on this area in the first wave, and then from other directions later on in the game. And here on this other half of the board, we have the inside of the post office divided into three main sections: basement, ground floor, and upper floors. And then we have three interior areas that also connected the floors. And these are the tokens representing our defenders, which are the people that we will be controlling. Many of them are represented by these white border tokens. They're all interchangeable. The white non-specialized tokens all have the same values, which is one as a combat value, and also when they get killed, they reduce your morale by 1 point. This is your morale track. And you lose points of morale when your people die. If it goes down to 0, you lose the game immediately. You have to survive 3 waves of enemy attacks without losing too much morale, and at that point to score points based on how many survivors you have and other factors, and that score will determine how well or poorly you did. Like in previous games in the system, your combatants have a ready side and an exhausted side, and you will need to spend actions to bring them back. Then we also have non-combatants, so they don't have any combat value, but if they die, the morale of the group goes down quite a bit. You have specialized people that have a better combat value. The morale doesn't go down when they die, and so maybe you're tempted, I guess I'll destroy them first so I don't lose morale. But then you're losing good fighters. And then we have characters with other attributes that basically special abilities, special values. This guy, the morale even goes up after he dies. I guess he wasn't too well liked. I'm sure it's something about how he inspired people. Or maybe just they hated his guts. I don't know. But losing this guy is also a problem because he has some really good, interesting attributes here. That is special actions and abilities that you can use. I'm not going to set up the game in its entirety because it's a little bit elaborate. You need to place one defender in every space here, plus some here, plus some tokens representing different weapons and ammo, and so on and so forth. No need to do that. To give you a general sense of how the game plays, we have 3 decks of enemy cards: morning, midday, and evening. We start with the morning. Each turn starts with an enemy phase in which you will draw cards on this deck, and then you simply resolve what the card says. Many cards will simply place people on the board. For example, this card will place a submachine gunner, and I'm told that it will be on a white or blue track, and I roll a die to determine exactly where it will go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's where I'll place it. Oh, I just rolled a 1 and 2, and so that one goes there. This is discarded, and I go to the next one. The next one will place a rifleman, and I just rolled a die. Oh, I rolled again 1 or 2 again, so I place that one there, and they form a bit of a conga line of evil. They keep pushing each other. Oh no, another rifleman, and I think you guessed what I rolled. I rolled a 1. So actually, another important thing, when the conga line reaches an obstruction, you will form a stack. You will form a stack like so. These numbered boxes represent obstructions. When an enemy piece goes adjacent to it for the first time, you will take this card, which you left out at the beginning, see barrier 1 corresponding to that one, and the granite bundle, you shuffle it into the deck, which means that when the next time it will be drawn, that is when, instead of piling up there, they'll be able to move through it. So during their phase, you will mainly place and move new enemy pieces. Sometimes it will be big machine guns that will be shooting at the building and things like that. As the game progresses and the Germans break down the barriers that protected the building, they will be able to enter the building, to enter the interior spaces. And that's bad. You gotta get rid of them as fast as possible, otherwise at the end of the turn they will start killing people in the post office very, very quickly and efficiently. Luckily enough, after the enemy phase in which they move, break down barriers, possibly enter the building, after that, you have your phase in which first you get to move and then you get to act. You have 4 movement tokens that you can assign to your people, and when you do so, they will move from an area of the floor that they're in to another area on the same floor. And suppose I want to move this person to this space there for some reason, or from here to here, and basically that's still the idea. You got 4 movement tokens, and when you move a character, you place a movement token. As they move, they can carry stuff with them. They can carry grenades, they can carry ammo, they can carry weapons, such as rifles, and so on and so forth. You can also spend a token to basically send, so you can place some movement on a character that is placed with equipment, and even without moving them, then you can send the equipment somewhere else in the same section of the building. After the movement, you can spend actions. You have 4 action tokens, as a reminder that you can perform 4 actions with 4 different characters. The character must not have a movement token on it. The character must not be exhausted. We'll see what that means. Must not be disrupted, must not have a disrupted token. In truth, if a character is exhausted or disrupted, you can spend an action on them. It's just that the only action you can do is to recover from exhausted to non-exhausted, or from disrupted to non-disrupted, removing the token. Also, you cannot spend an action token on a character that already has one. So you cannot unexhaust somebody and then use them the same turn. Luckily enough, some people have a command action that will allow you to give 3 immediate recover actions to defenders in the same section of the building, because otherwise it really takes a while. When you perform an action with a character that is not exhausted, say that one, then you place an action token and yes, you exhaust them. Luckily enough, moving at least does not exhaust your people. The actions, a very common action you will perform will be to attack. Attack is always the same. You need to use a defender to attack that has a line of sight to the target. If you're in the same section of the building and they're in the interior, then you have a line of sight. Otherwise, you look at the color of the space in which you are, or the shape, so blue pentagon, and you see that the outside of the building has different areas marked. So I can shoot in that area if I am in that area and I have a rifle. Most people were armed with normal pistols, so to shoot from inside the building to the outside you need a rifle. Attacking is always the same idea. You will roll a number of 6-sided dice, depending on several factors, your combat factor, possible bonuses, and you score a hit and remove the enemy piece if at least one of the dice is equal to or higher than the defense factor of the enemy that you are attacking. Similarly, similar to attack is suppression, as sorta similar. You will use the action to place suppression tokens on the board, and again it's similar to attack because basically you're shooting in a space which looks empty at that time, but then you can turn the suppression tokens into attacks later. You're basically banking future attacks. Again, it represents the fact that you're making it harder for people to move into that space. Oh, speaking of attack, you can also attack with grenades, and when these people enter the building and maybe there's a big pile in there, that's really your only hope, which is you spend a grenade, and by attacking with a grenade then you can attack all of the enemies in a single area as opposed to one target per attack. Also, if they are outside, remember they form stacks as they advance. You can only attack the one on top of the stack, and then you remove that, and then you attack the next, and so on and so forth. So attack with grenades, suppress, recover, those are the main actions. Command, mean use the command action to help other people recover, but these are the general ideas. And again, it really gets tense and personal and really, really dramatic when these people enter the building and you know you have to get rid of them, because otherwise you have the next phase, which is the clearing phase, in which they start killing people, your morale goes down, and so on and so forth. So you have to survive 3 decks until basically, as it happened historically, the Germans set the post office on fire. That's the only way they could take it. So that marks the end of the game, and at that point you check how many people survived and you score points based on that, and that tells you how well or how poorly you did. Soldiers in Postmen uniforms. This is another impressive game in a family of games that I've already enjoyed. They just don't fail. They're just good, consistently good, and yet different enough. In Pavlov House, we had so many different things to take care of because we were there for a long period of time. So it was about the communications and supplies and stuff like that. Castor Eater felt a little more minimalistic in comparison with the other ones, a little more just with a strong emphasis on this one event. Soldiers in Postmen uniforms may feel a little bit chaotic at the beginning because you have so many more things that you have to handle, so many more soldiers and ammo and rifles and grenades. So maybe if you haven't played the other games, this may not be the one to start from. But frankly, I think the rulebook does a really good job of teaching you the game. You have excellent player rates. Something I love about those player rates, they're single-sided. No one likes to flip the player rate because you don't remember what's on the other side. It's a little touch, but it's a touch of somebody that knows how people play war games and what we appreciate or what annoys us. So even if you've never played games of the other games in the system, it's not going to be impossible for you to start from this one. But if you really want to go smooth, then start from maybe Castle Eater. So what we have here is a really intense, chaotic, really visceral experience. I I played many war games in my life, and they're just so much about those units. And you know that those units represent people fighting, dying, getting wounded, suffering. But here you see everyone's faces. It's right there. Even it's even more visceral than other games where you have a counter to represent a single soldier, and you see them at a distance. You see the whole figurine, the whole profile. They're right there, and you know that's the real face, and you know that's the real name. It's really powerful, and it becomes even much more visceral when the Germans get in there, and then you really have the feeling that these people are going to be mowed down, and you have this desperate action. You throw grenades in a confined space. So it's just so intense. It's a really different experience from almost every other war game that I played. And before you get there, you really have this crescendo of doom and of horror as you do see them piling up, quite literally stacking one on top of the other. And you really have the feeling thematically that you see them advancing and they are forming larger and larger groups out there, and you're out there from the windows shooting at them and really putting barely a dent in those defenses while they are targeting you with those ginormous, or it feels that way, machine guns that are strafing basically the upper floors. It's a powerful, intense action. When I had this kind of feel, very often I compare like a war game to, say, an action movie. But this is not it. This feels like a tragedy, like a realistic, visceral movie about war where you have that intense action but doesn't feel cool. It feels grim. Doesn't feel like, yeah, I chained up those things and dropped that bomb and do those things. When you do it, you feel like when you do inflict damage on the opponent, you feel a sense of relief, but you know that this is really about a human tragedy that just is represented in an impressive way. Now, for gameplay itself, it has all the good things that we have seen in other games in the system, and even before then that we have seen in the Stage of Siege system, which I like very much, and these games remind me of that, just with more things that you can do with a more tactical feel when it comes to resolution of the action, but at least the way the enemies activate moving on these tracks, and you then have certain actions. There are certain elements in common. But again, with more detail here in the things that you can do, the exhausted mechanic, which again adds to the human drama, adds to the mounting horror. I need somebody out there because they're blowing out the barricades, but everybody's exhausted. Very powerful. So the game system is very nice, is very strong. The waves, the different waves have a bit of mixed feelings about them. It's great that in between them you get to reset some elements, you get to unexhaust the people. It's almost like a tragedy, multiple acts, like again a movie that they tend to be structured in three main acts. But that also means that there's a certain narrative, there is a certain architecture that doesn't have a huge variety from time to time. The overall plot will tend to present itself from game to game in a similar way. The Germans will always attack from the south, and sure, they may attack from 1-2 or from 3-4 mainly, but in any case, they will form those piles, those crowds in front of the barricades, and ultimately, if that crowd came from 1-2 or first and 3-4 later, or vice versa, ultimately they form those piles there. Then they attack from different directions. The overall narrative tends to be the same or very similar, different from other games. A comparison comes to mind, Soviet Dawn, because it has a similar idea of the card generating actions. We played a couple of months ago in the State of Siege system, which things may play out in many different ways. So it's not so much about the story playing out in vastly different ways, but it is about how you're gonna handle your. They look like it's a lot of resources, but those grenades, that ammo, those deplete quickly, and the later phase of the game really had that desperate feel. Your exhaustion, the exhaustion of your soldiers, and you're spending so many actions, so you're trying to work the timing right on when people are acting and people are recovering. So there's still a lot of elements that offset the overall challenge. It tends to be a little more repetitive because you can try to tackle it in different ways. And of course, there's a random element that will throw wrenches into your plans all the time. So I like the waves. Again, I'm not super crazy about about how they script the story a bit more, but there's just so much other stuff to do with it that I just wanted to point it out. But that doesn't absolutely, it's not a deal breaker. It's not even a deal. I don't know. Doesn't even put a minimal crack in the deal. I just wanted to point it out because the flow of the game is different. But we still have a game which is very solid, very fun, incredibly visceral. It feels very real to the point that, I don't know, it's not a game that I would play every day just for the fun of it. It's a game that requires a certain willingness to engage with history and with the tragedy of history at a pretty deep level. And I appreciate that there are games that are able to do that. Soldiers in Postmen uniforms, definitely a solid game, a unique gaming feel, and just a very solid game when it comes to decisions and agency and all the things a player can do. Really an impressive design.